Welcome to the Halacha podcast Leman Yishmu with Harav Yosef Yeshaya Braun, Mara Da'asra, and a member of the Crown Heights Beis Din. This podcast is brought to you by the Ask the Rav platform in partnership with Leman Yilmedu, the premier institute for practical halacha learning.
Welcome to Leman Yishmu Ask the Rav podcast number 12. I got an interesting shaila this week where a woman took upon herself a commitment that she's only going to hear Kiddush from her husband. Problem is this week she won't be able to hear Kiddush from her husband, and she wanted to know if she needs to have hataras nedarim. She needs to annul her vow, her commitment. Can it be done on Shabbos? This question came in right before Shabbos, and how is it done? So just to go through the details of this question, the halacha is that when it comes to a minik toiv, a positive thing, which has some root in Torah and Yiddishkeit, then if a person commits to do this on a regular basis, or even if they haven't made any formal commitment, they just started doing bestam without any commitment, they've already done it 3 times. So once they do it 3 times, it's considered a commitment, and they're bound to do it. And if they want to stop doing it, there's a concept of hataras nedarim, of annulment of vows. When it comes specifically to a vow associated with tzedakah, with hegdish, with a mitzvah, and in that category falls in also minik toiv, a positive, good custom, even gomer beliba, even if a person just in their mind mentally makes a decision that this is what they're going to be doing, that takes on the force of a neder, at least midraban, at least rabbinically. Now, it's important to point out that gomer beliba means making a decision. Often people think of different things. Yeah, it's a good idea to do X, Y, Z, but if it wasn't gomer beliba, gomer means complete. It also has that meaning. If it's a complete formal decision, I decided I'm going to give now a donation to this and this institution $100. That's what we call nidrei tzedakah. Sometimes, yeah, it might be a good idea to give, but people are derech adam le'isnachem. People keep on changing their mind. Yeah, 100 shekel, 50 shekel. So you don't have to keep on obsessing that the fact that I originally thought 100 means I can't go down. But once you made a decision, so here she made that decision, and that was the question. So now let's go into the details of this question. Is there anything positive halachically with hearing Kiddush specifically from your husband? There's no such thing. There's no advantage for a woman to hear Kiddush from her husband specifically. It really doesn't fall under minik toiv. A lot of women think it's respectful for the husband. It's a very nice thing. But it actually has some negative aspects to it too. It means waiting for a husband to come home. It means fasting on Shabbos. There's nothing really in halacha that says that it's advantageous dafka to hear from a husband. There's something called beroiv am. There's 2 different opinions about that. Is there an advantage in each individual making their own kiddush, or one person making for everyone? Which I'm not going to go into that right now. But it didn't stem from that aspect that dafka to have 1 kiddush versus 2 kiddushim. That wasn't the idea over here. The idea here is specifically to hear from a husband. It wasn't about kiddush over wine versus grape juice. It could be she can make herself on wine also. That wasn't the neder. The commitment was hearing from my husband. I'll wait for my husband. Many women do that. Sometimes it puts the husband in an inconvenient position because now he has to rush, and sometimes maybe to begin with the wife shouldn't have to wait for them to begin with. But these are all shalom bias aspects, which is not the subject of our discussion. So had she only thought to do so in her mind, this is what she decided, then, okay, so she decided, she changed her mind. There's a lot of decisions people make throughout the day, and you can change your mind about it. The problem is if a person actually verbalizes their commitment, so even if it's not a minik toiv, a neder, a person can make a neder, a vow, an actual promise, a commitment, specify that this is a vow. They can make a promise about anything, even the stupidest thing, and it's binding. They could decide that they're going to stop eating X, or yes, eat X, or whatever it is. And here in this case, she actually verbalized her commitment. Since she verbalized it, and she didn't only verbalize, which people often do, I already decided. Saying I already decided isn't a neder. Saying I am committing to do so and so, she actually committed, she said that she's making this commitment. And now the right thing would be to say bli neder. But if a person does not say bli neder, always a person should, any decision they make, they should always say bli neder. So it shouldn't run into the shaila. She didn't say bli neder. She made a promise. She made a commitment. We run into a shaila of a neder, and the question was, can she do hataras nedarim? Certainly she can do hataras nedarim. You're allowed to even do it on Shabbos, because this is L'tzoyrich Shabbos, for the purpose of Shabbos, and the way to do it is to get 3 people together, 3 men that are, one of them knows the halachas of nedarim and knows what you're allowed to be matar neder, what you're not allowed to be matar neder, because you're supposed to specify the neder to the rabbi. There's a mitzvah of pidut neder, specifying the neder. Part of that is to know, because some nedarim, some vows cannot be annulled. So one of them, the neder is specified to, the other 2 don't even have to know what the neder is. And there's a process of charata where they express remorse why they took on this neder or why they didn't say bli neder, and a pesach, and opening a channel where you could do hatara, and the neder is annulled. There is the hataras and nedarim that we do on Erev Rosh Hashanah. Hataras and nedarim Erev Rosh Hashanah is what we do, a general hataras and nedarim, and you can't just rely on that if you know the specific neder and you didn't specify it. So that's in response to this question. Let's move on to the next question. So, Shavuos, this came up a lot when it came to Shavuos. A lot of people want to be Mekayim, but the Rebbe asked to get everyone to come to Shul to hear Aseres Hadibros, specifically children, even younger children, even babies, if it's okay as far as their health is concerned, at least from 1 month up, to get them to hear Aseres Hadibros, because of at the time of Aseres Hadibros, when Aseres Hadibros is being read in Shul during Krias HaTorah, that is the giving of the Torah happening, is Hashem giving the Torah from anew. And specifically, it's important that children should be there, because the children are the guarantors for Kabbalah HaTorah. Hashem said you need a guarantor, and the guarantor were the children. So important to point out, when the Rebbe spoke about this, he mentioned specifically the idea that it should be in Shul, which is a Makom Kiddush. It's a Migdash Ma'at, and it's a place where people daven, and therefore it will have the mile of Krias HaTorah and davening, Torah and Tefillah together. It's a place which includes Torah and Tefillah. It's the Rebbe specifically spoke about being there for Krias HaTorah. Sometimes the Rebbe said they should at least if they can't come, they should come from the words Vayidaber Elokim, a few psukim before, from B'Chodesh HaShlishi. Krias HaTorah in general, specifically Aseres Hadibros. At one occasion, the Rebbe said they should be in Shul here, Krias HaTorah and davening. But at least we should try to get them to come for Aseres Hadibros, wherever that's possible. Now, in some places, they try to arrange for people to come, but they won't necessarily come to Shul. And therefore, different ideas have been developed of having different forms of Krias HaTorah, which will attract the audience, and particularly the children, to come, even if it's not in the context of a particular normal shul. So while that's not exactly what the Rebbe spoke about, the idea of the Rebbe was to do Krias HaTorah in shul, and they should come to the existing Krias HaTorah, but I still want to explore the various different things that are being done. So one of the ideas that were floated around, and I understand that people did this or considered doing this on Shavuos, is to arrange in a park, to do Krias HaTorah in a park. And that's a place where there's a lot of kids there, a lot of kids will come there, a lot of kids are there. We can promise them ice creams and nash and whatever it is, and do the Krias HaTorah in a park. The problem, of course, is that being metaltal a Sefer Torah, moving a Sefer Torah, is a very, very severe thing. Particularly moving a Sefer Torah into a public area, into the Rechav, into the street, is a mamish, really a terrible thing. There's serious issues with that. The Zohar talks about even not moving from one shul to another shul. Place can talk about even within the shul from one room to another. And there's a lot of halachas about moving a Sefer Torah, when it's allowed, when it's not allowed. So someone suggested that perhaps there's a way we could arrange Krias HaTorah in the park. Again, I'm not convinced this is what the Rebbe wanted, but we're just exploring the halacha itself. Based on the fact that 10 people will go along with the Sefer Torah when it's taken out of shul, and there's some heter based on a kaf hachaim. So I was told there's a kaf hachaim, that based on this kaf hachaim, it's okay to take a Sefer Torah. If 10 people take the Sefer Torah, or walk along with the Sefer Torah. Now, the short answer is this is absolutely not correct, and it's a very serious issue. It should be shumoifen. It should not be done, and should have not been done. Having 10 people go along with the Sefer Torah does not allow for this to happen. This kaf hachaim that people are talking about, let's go to the root of the inyan. Kaf hachaim brings it from a sefer called Piskei Rekanti. It's brought in other poskim too. Now, they clearly are talking about that when you take it from one shul to another, and they follow the position that you're allowed to take it from Beit Knishta to Beit Knishta, which is a big machlokas if you're allowed to do that. And I'm not convinced that we should be seeking out a heter in something which many poskim say you're not allowed to do. That's not what we're supposed to be doing. But let's go along with this at least. Here we're talking about those that say you're allowed to take it from one shul to another. So there's still an Indian that whenever you take a Sefer Torah, 10 people should go along. Clearly, the way it's written in the Birkei Yosef, the Chida also wrote Birkei Yosef, he also wrote a Sefer called David Emes. Toiv, it's a good idea. Why we're taking the Sefer Torah anyhow, because we're allowed to take it from one shul to another. It's a good idea 10 people should go along. It's not a heter wherever you're not allowed to carry it, 10 people will go along. It's very, very likely that they're actually talking about something totally different. The Sefer Torah is in a shul, we're moving the Sefer Torah. People sometimes need to bring a Sefer Torah to a new hataras, to a new shul. Now it's going to stay in this shul. Still, whenever you take a Sefer Torah, you should be respectful to the Sefer Torah. We're not talking about the heter of moving. We're talking about now the Sefer Torah is being in transit. We should have 10 people going along. It's not about allowing the issur of moving a Sefer Torah because there are 10 people there. There's a similar case. The Zer Emes has a tshuva. There was a shul which they couldn't open the Aron Kiddush on Shabbos. They were stuck. So he agreed with the opinion, you're allowed to take it from another shul, but he also asked to have 10 people coming along with it. Clearly, according to Allah, you're not allowed to bring a Sefer Torah into the street. That is according to all opinions. So having 10 people coming along, there's no such heter of 10 people coming along. There are some other sources. Every one of those sources will clearly demonstrate have no connection. The Aseres Hadibros talks about a sukkah in a home, and they would have a place set up in the sukkah for the Sefer Torah, which is a special set heter when there's already a place prepared for the Sefer Torah in Aron Kiddush, whatever it is. He clearly talks about, is very inclined that you're not allowed to do it. Some person can bring this tshuva, but they don't bring the whole entire context. If you look inside the tshuva, you see clearly had a hard time with it. The Tzitz Eliezer talks about in the Kos Lamarava where they move the Sefer Torah to the various different minyanim. He also brings this tshuva. But if you look there clearly, he also writes that the whole entire community went along with the Sefer Torah, not 10 people, so it's a different heter altogether. The Be'eres Hamayim talks about the same case, which was a common thing. Looks like people would carry the Sefer Torah from the house to the sukkah, sukkah to the house. And he clearly says, even if you prepare the Sefer Torah there a day or two in advance, you're not allowed to do it. The Aseres Hadibros that I quoted brings an early Sefer called Eidos B'Yosef. And if you look at that Sefer Torah, it was a place that almost wouldn't have been Krias HaTorah for the entire city. And he still was very, very machmer. There was a shul, a small city, very few people there. Shul was burnt. They continued davening in this destroyed shul, but they couldn't leave the Sefer Torah there. So they had an aron, a protected, nice place where they kept the Sefer Torah. After davening, they would bring it back. He says, don't bring it just for Krias HaTorah. You have to bring it before davening in this set place, and during Krias HaTorah, then take it out. So clearly, these are svarim that are being quoted. They don't give a heter for 10 people accompanying it. The only source that we know is the Eshel Avram. Eshel Avram, Talmud of the Baditchever, brings that he heard from the Shulam 5 Yishuv is about as the Yosher Divrei Emes, a tzad heter. Tzad heter means it's not a heter. Excuse me, it's a tzad. I apologize. A tzad heter, an inclination towards a heter, together with other arguments. And he says he heard about this heter, about 10 people going along. And now look at this case that he's talking about. He had a house attached to the shul. It was under one roof. He still wasn't comfortable with moving the Sefer Torah in such a case also, even though really koisel echad l'shneim, there's one wall which surrounds us all under one roof. And he wanted also 10 people to go along, and more than that, not just 10 people going along, he wanted them to make a mechitza. So this idea of 10 people, the 10 people form a mechitza, it's not just 10 people going along. There are other poskim that talk about this idea of 10 people going along. Again, they're talking about carrying from shul to a shul, a specific heter for Simchas Torah where everybody needs an aliyah, and therefore they hold that you're allowed to do it on Simchas Torah. And they add the idea of 10 people going along. But you don't find anyone that is saying that the 10 people itself is a heter. In those cases where it's already mutter, they made the heter better by having 10 people going along, or they added it as a chumrah. And in the 10 people, either some of them write that the 10 people need to make a mechitza, or they say you need to have the entire community. The one source that I found that gives us heter if the community goes along and he doesn't add anything else, just that itself, is the Chuvas Mari HaKohen. But it's not clear in the question what the case they're talking about. And even in his case, he also spoke about the entire community has to go along. And if you think about it, the heter of the entire community is a different heter. The idea is the Torah going to you, or you're going to the Torah. If there's some people in the community that didn't go along, then we have the problem of HaTorah heleches eslam. The Torah is going to the people, and that's a problem. So the heter here was everybody was going along with the Sefer Torah. Now, of course, that wouldn't be practical in a place where you're making Krias HaTorah in the park specifically because people are not going to come otherwise. So obviously they're not going to come along with the Sefer Torah. Clearly, when the place can talk about the Isser of Tilton Sefer Torah, they mention Mishnah Berurah brings the Eli Rabbah that says a minyan who are going and taking a Sefer Torah. There was a case, I don't want to mention the details, where they took the Sefer Torah from the shul of Maria Avuav when there was an earthquake in Tzfas, and 10 people were Mekadosh themselves and took the Sefer Torah, and it says a terrible thing happened. So sometimes we see a heter, but it's not, you have to look into the context how the heter is brought. In this case specifically, we're talking about laying the Sefer Torah in the street, and the street is worse off than anything else. Carrying to the street, laying in the street. So to take a heter of a different case and apply it to a case where clearly is worse than anything else, and nobody speaks about this, it makes no sense. It really should not be done. It's a terrible thing to do. Moving on to another question. A lot of people ask questions on Shavuos about forgetting Eruv Tavshilin. Unfortunately, this is very, very common. People forget to make an Eruv Tavshilin. And the question arises, what do you do if you forget? And the problem, of course, is when it comes to Rosh Hashanah, other Yom Tov, there's a heter. If you remember a Yom Tov, you can make a Tanai. You can make a stipulation on the first day of Yom Tov. It doesn't apply in Rosh Hashanah. It doesn't apply in many cases. You can use this heter of a Tanai. But we're talking about Bechlal. What could people do that they shouldn't forget? So there's a lot of good eitzes out there to help people not forget. And they can have an alarm. They can have, in the area of cooking, in the kitchen, right by the oven and stove, they can have some type of reminder about making Eruv Tavshilin. They're really simple solutions. But someone suggested, perhaps an idea, a Rav mentioned to me an idea that he has, that they'll have a system where it's a phone system which will call in the name of the Rabbanim different people in the city to remind them to make an Eruv Tavshilin, and then the system will allow that you appoint a Rav as your shliach in case you forget to make an Eruv Tavshilin. So you'll press a certain button, whatever it is, and the system says if you're pressing this button, that means you're appointing the Rav as your shliach. So, there's a lot of details why this could be, how this could work and how this can't work. It, of course, depends if you're within the Tchum and not in the Tchum. You have to know if the Rabbanim are in town or not in town, and who's going to be within the Tchum and out of the Tchum. But this was a suggestion that was floated around. The Rav that mentioned this to me and wrote about it came with a bunch of different questions. What happens if you already appointed this Rav as a shliach? Now, can you make your own Eruv Tavshilin? How will that work? But there's another problem altogether which he hasn't mentioned. And the Rebbe talks about this din of making an Eruv Tavshilin. He says that everybody has to make their own Eruv Tavshilin, or they could ask someone else to make an Eruv Tavshilin if they're using your objects. Mishaloi b'toich beisai. Using your objects, and they're doing it in your house. So, clearly it's from the Rebbe, it's not, an Eruv Tavshilin works when you make an Eruv or you ask someone else to use your chafetzim. The fact that another person makes an Eruv and picks it up for you, that's not going to work. He's clearly talking about a case where the Balabayas separates food for the Eruv Tavshilin and someone else makes the Eruv. This comes out very clear from the Mata Ephraim as well. Interesting, the Rebbe also says, B'soif Beisai, it should be in your house. The question is whether it actually means that it actually has to be done in your house. What's the mile of in your house? But certainly Mishaloi has to be yours. Now the Mishnah Berurah seems not to hold like that. For the Mishnah Berurah, it seems clear that it helps even if it's not yours. Let me explain this a bit better. There is a concept that the rabbi in town, the Gadol Le'ir, can make an Eruv Tavshilin for everyone, but that doesn't work unless someone forgot to make an Eruv Tavshilin, and his forgetting wasn't negligent. And that becomes the question, when is it considered negligence? You forgot. Why did you forget? Obviously, it's not so important for you. It's the first time you forgot, it's the second time you forgot, it's the third time you forgot. What, you were busy and therefore you forgot, or you just forgot because you forgot? Because forgetting is not always considered accidental. So when we say that you're not allowed to rely on the rabbi, on the Gadol Le'ir, if you, however, appoint someone specifically to be your shliach, then it works. So the Mishnah Berurah takes the position even further. Mishnah Berurah takes the position that this, that it doesn't help you relying on someone else, is when you found, you didn't go and talk to the rabbi before. You didn't know in advance. But if you knew in advance that the rabbi is making, and you didn't come and discuss it on Yom to say, oh, you made for me? Okay, fine. In this case, the Mishnah Berurah says, if the rabbi told you, I'm going to make him, say, sure, no problem. It would work. The Alter Rebbe clearly doesn't hold it. The Alter Rebbe says he has to become your shliach. It's not enough that he agrees. You have to make him your shliach, and he has to use mishaloi. He has to use your items. There's a lot of questions on what the Mishnah Berurah says. I don't want to go into alumnus right now. It's very hard to accept the Mishnah Berurah's svara. And clearly it seems like there's a special thing of making a shlichus, and it has to be yours. Why does it have to be yours? Well, it really depends on what the reasons for Eruv Tavshilin. One of the reasons of Eruv Tavshilin is that you have to make sure you have food left over. You might forget not having any food left over Shabbos after your beautiful milchig and fleshig shluas meals. So when you make an Eruv Tavshilin, that helps you remember to have something left for Shabbos. So when you're asking someone else to make for you, it might not work unless he's actually using your food. At least so we can argue. We can also argue that according to the other reason of Eruv Tavshilin, that you should remember that you're not allowed to cook from Yom Tov to the week. If you know that you can't cook from Yom Tov to Shabbos, only through Eruv Tavshilin will help you remember the halacha that you're allowed to cook from Yom Tov to the week. What's the idea? That when you already started and took one item and set it aside for Shabbos with the Eruv Tavshilin, then all the other cooking means you're finishing off. You already started cooking, you're just finishing it off. So if it's not your food, you can't say that you're finishing off the cooking because it wasn't your food to begin with. And these are different arguments about why the Alter Rebbe says so, but clearly the Alter Rebbe says so, and therefore that creates a problem. I want to mention one more thing about Eruv Tavshilin, and it's a question that happens every Yom Tov, and we have it on Shavuos as well. People often ask, what about guests? They stay eating by someone else. Does the Eruv Tavshilin of the other person work for them? Does it not work for them? So, and nowadays there's another part to the question that's often asked, which earlier poskim don't address, but the contemporary poskim address. You're eating by someone, but you're sleeping in your own house. So many people question, if you're sleeping in your own house, will Eruv Tavshilin work for you? Honestly, I don't begin to understand what difference does sleeping make about this. If we accept the position that if you're staying in someone's house for many days, then you become a member of their family and that Eruv Tavshilin works for you, then what difference does it make where you're sleeping? That's really irrelevant to the discussion. People often talk about, are they required to make Eruv Tavshilin? Are they going to be doing anything? They're eating everything by someone else and not doing any cooking. And the answer is, well, you're benching licht. And indeed, actually, according to there's a machlokes if benching licht requires an Eruv Tavshilin. According to the Alter Rebbe, benching licht requires an Eruv Tavshilin with a bracha. But other people talk about, but you're going to make your own coffee. These are all discussions whether you require an Eruv Tavshilin. The question now is not whether you require, the question is whether you become exempt with someone else's Eruv Tavshilin. So if you're staying by your parents, by your in-laws, you can be exempt by their Eruv Tavshilin. Now, the fact that you're sleeping somewhere, this has nothing to do with sleeping. This has to do with, it all has to do with eating. When you're eating from their foods, then their food is yours, their Eruv Tavshilin becomes yours, everything becomes yours. This is clearly built in, proven from the Rush, who discusses this topic, and he talks about a wife that has another house where she stays. Clearly, the issue is not about where you're sleeping. Now, the poskim talk about, the Alter Rebbe, the Yam Shloim talk about Bnei Beisa, the family members are all exempt with one Eruv. It's not, they don't talk about other people that are coming, let's say married children or other guests that are coming over. But the minig is that other people that come over and staying by Yudei Shlavram already brings this minig, and he says that minig is that married children that come over all rely on the Eruv Tavshilin of the Baal Habayis. So once we accept that position, I don't see any reason to make a distinction whether they're sleeping there or not sleeping there. The Shlavram goes even further, and he says that even if they're eating in a different room, or even if they're eating on a different table, which is an interesting Kiddush. So the problem really that we have not, the real problem which people don't talk about so much is not where they're sleeping, that's irrelevant, is even when they're eating, are they really eating there? There's different days we could talk about. There's Yom Tov, when the Eruv Tavshilin is made so you're able to cook on Yom Tov for Shabbos. There's Shabbos, which the Eruv Tavshilin was for the covenant of Shabbos, according to one reason. And there's Erev Yom Tov when you make the Eruv Tavshilin. So when we say guests are included, does that mean guests that are there for Erev Yom Tov, guests that are there for Yom Tov, or guests that are there for Shabbos? There's many ways to look at it. There's proofs one way or another. There's strong argument to say that it has to do with Yom Tov when you're cooking for Shabbos, but there's also strong arguments to say that it has to do with Erev Yom Tov when Eruv Tavshilin is Chal. And because of that creates a problem, because sometimes they're not there for all of that time, for Erev Yom Tov and for Yom Tov and for Shabbos. Which in this case, it's always better because of the Shaila, so just have the person make the Eruv Tavshilin for you, like the din of making a shliach to make an Eruv Tavshilin. This is certainly not called a Pesheya, where you can't rely on the Gadol Eir, because it is a suffix in halach if you have to make an Eruv Tavshilin. But clearly, if you haven't picked it up for you and you do that, that should work. At least make it become yours, even before the Eruv Tavshilin, and everything should work fine. I'll just mention a different question altogether. Moving on from Eruv Tavshilin, now is the Chasna season, and I've been brought a lot of different designs of ksuba often to ask if this ksuba is a legitimate ksuba or not. So recently someone sent me a design of a ksuba. The problem was the design was such that it was very hard to read the ksuba text because the design and the ksuba text were interfering one with another, which was a separate discussion. And because a ksuba is a shtar, a document that has to follow the halachas of shtaris, so it has to be in such a way that you can't forge it. So that has to be examined case by case. But my real problem over here was, even though that's not a halacha problem, but a hashkafa problem, based on the design, so people often put different psukim in the design. We should talk about whether psukim should be used for this or not. The custom has been for many, many years, hundreds of years, people would put psukim around the ksuba. Ksuba is not an item that you throw in the garbage. So there's room for leniency to write psukim. I mean, there's halacha b'chlal, you're not supposed to write 3 words of the Torah without sirtul, without scraping underneath, but that's, again, there's a lot of leniencies in that also. But the issue was, the pasuk that what I was given has a pasuk on Nila Doidi v'Doidi Li, which in my opinion is totally inappropriate to have such a pasuk on a ksuba. The pasuk talks about the love of Hashem and Yidden. Why are you using a pasuk that talks about Hashem's love to us and our love to Hashem when we talk about the romance between husband and wife? It's using Shir HaShirim for the wrong thing. Chazal talk about people who use Shir HaShirim to make love songs out of Shir HaShirim and how terrible that is. So here it's not a love song, but here it's a love statement. So interesting, someone went and asked on ChatGPT and AI, asking, is it okay to write the Pasuk Nila Doidi? And they came up with a bunch of Torahs why it is okay, the reason why it shouldn't be okay, why it really is okay. And they wrote that traditionally this was a Pasuk that was always used, and they gave examples of old ksubas that used this Pasuk. So when I was informed about this, I said, I want to see the sources. I looked up every one of those sources as taka, indeed ancient, fascinating ancient ksubas, but none of them actually had the Pasuk Nila Doidi v'Doidi Li. So this is just incorrect information. But the argument also was that it's a pasuk that talks about the love of 2 human beings. So we're using the same pasuk, but the argument is faulty. The pasuk talks about, it uses a metaphor from a human love, husband and wife, and therefore derives from that love. It's a mashal, and from there we talk about the love of Hashem and Yidden. But here we're talking about the reverse, taking a pasuk which talks about the love of Hashem and Yidden, and actually using it for our love. That's the opposite way around. That really wouldn't make much sense. And finally, last but not least, interesting question. I'm not going to give a psak about this question. This is a Chesha Mishpat question. There was a heavy debate amongst a number of Rabbanim this week about this topic, where there was an individual that was in a shul. This is a Beis Medrash in Eretz Yisrael, where a bunch of people crowded into a small Beis Medrash. They used Shtenders in this Beis Medrash, and someone had a laptop or an iPad on the Shtender, and people do that. They write on their laptop Kiddush HaTorah. They look up Svarim on the laptop, and someone was learning, and he just moved back slightly, stretched his hands, and because he stretched his hand, the laptop on the other Shtender fell. And the question was if he was chayiv or not. So there's arguments here and there. I'm just going to mention some basic principles, and a bunch of Rabbanim got involved in this argument. Again, this is a Chesha Mishpat case, and there's so many factors that could influence the psak. The key principle we have is that we learn from a pasuk, Petza Tachas Petza, L'chayiv ala oines keratzen, that when a person causes injury, Adam hamazik, when you cause injury, Adam mud la'olam, a person is responsible for all of those actions, whether he's awake, whether he's sleeping, whether it's accidental. There's no heter of accident. Tosfos, however, says that there's a heter called oines gomer, that if a person, it's an absolute accident. What's an example of an absolute accident? A person goes to sleep, there was nothing there, and someone put his items, his glasses next to me while I was sleeping. So that's an absolute accident. We have in the Gemara where a person walks in the street and there's a drug in the middle of the street, it's actually not normal to look in the streets. You don't have to look. But the person can explain, because it's not normal to have drugs in the street. It is actually pretty normal to have laptops on top of Shtenders, or at least in this particular base of marriage, it's a very, very common thing. So if that's common, you should look. Now, could be there's a difference when it's dark, the Gemara says, and the Gemara actually brings an example where it's normal to put out drugs in front of a olive press. So the question here is now, is it normal for a person, people make movements, they move back and forth all the time. So one of the Rabbanim were arguing, it's impossible to control yourself in moving back and forth. What do you mean? That's part of your job. You need to look, it's part of your job to check it out. And this is an interesting discussion. I'm not going to give a psak, but that's just, I'm mentioning the back and forth about this topic. Hatzlacha Rabbah.
Join the global halacha learning revolution of the Laman Yilmedu Institute and bring increased brachos into your home. For details about the various learning programs, visit our website, lemanyilmedu.com. That's LEMAANYILMEDU.com.